There's a certain type of artist that feels impossible to explain to someone who hasn't discovered them yet. Not because they're necessarily the biggest artists, not because they have millions of fans, but because once you find them, their music feels like an entire world. Lucille is one of those artists.
Some throwing rocks at your window in hopes that maybe you'll answer.
Over the past few years, Lucille has quietly built one of the most recognizable sounds in the internet underground, combining alternative music, distorted production, emotional songwriting, and an aesthetic that feels almost completely detached from mainstream music. And what's interesting is that his catalog didn't just appear overnight. There's an actual evolution behind it. From Phosphor Dreams in 2022, to I Wish I Was Pretty, to Peace, You Idiot, to Scarlet, to Shatter, and eventually Reprisal in the big 2026. To understand Lucille, you have to go back for the albums that made people start paying attention. One of the earliest documented appearances in his catalog is Phosphor Dream, released February 14th, 2022. But there's an important distinction here. Phosphor Dreams isn't a traditional Lucille solo album. It's credited to Slowgramming, Lucille, and Forbidden Creme, and the project is categorized as electronic. The project contains 15 tracks and feels much more like an experimental collaboration than the Lucille people would eventually become familiar with. That's important because it shows something about his development. Lucille wasn't simply trying to make a conventional alternative record. He was already experimenting with atmospheric, electronic textures, strange arrangements, and a sound that didn't fit neatly into one genre. At this point, there was no Peace, You Idiot, no Scarlet, no Shatter. The identity was still being formed. Then came 2024, and this is where the Lucille identity starts becoming much clearer. On July 5th, 2024, Lucille released the 6-track EP, I Wish I Was Pretty. The project is only around 8 minutes long, but it introduces a much more personal and emotional and stable side of his music. Tracklist includes Matter Love, Such a, What If I Stole Your Heart, Don't Shoot Us Down, Hang Me on the Oak Tree, and Take Me Out. And even the titles tell you a lot. This isn't music trying to sound polished or emotionally safe. It's messy, romantic, aggressive, self-destructive, and intentionally uncomfortable. Take Matter Love. The song centers around obsession, psychological instability, and a relationship that feels like it's collapsing in real time. Gives you a glimpse into the kind of emotional world Lucille would continue exploring throughout his catalog. Then comes one of the most important releases in his entire history, Peace, You Idiot. On November 15th, 2024, Lucille released Peace, You Idiot. 12 songs, about 26 minutes, and this is arguably the project where Lucille's sound really begins to take shape. The album opens with one of its most recognizable songs, Point Blank Range. The song was released as a single on September 20th, 2024 before appearing on the album, and Point Blank Range immediately establishes the tone. The production feels chaotic, the lyrics move between obsession, anger, paranoia, loneliness, and emotional collapse. It's not simply a love song, it's a relationship being experienced through an extremely unstable emotional state. And that's one of the things that makes Lucille's music stand out. Songs aren't necessarily trying to tell a clean story. They're trying to make you feel like you're inside someone's head. Point Blank Range, Insane, Wounds, Russian Roulette, Blood, Guts, and Gore, Nothing Less, Nothing More, Garments, Crave, Die For You More, Hollow, I Watch the World Turn Dark, and Villain. I think the song that most defines Lucille's identity has to be Insane. Even the title itself just describes how emotional the atmosphere of the project is. Instead of separating romance, anger, insecurity, and self-destruction into different songs, Lucille constantly allows them to overlap. That becomes one of his signatures throughout the music that he produces. Hollow. At over 3 minutes, it's one of the longer songs on the album. It's also a good example of Lucille slowing down and allowing the atmosphere to breathe. Instead of relying entirely on aggression, the song creates a feeling of emptiness. And that contrast is what makes Peace, You Idiot work as an album. It's not just angry, it's lonely. The interesting thing about Lucille's rise is that it wasn't based around one giant mainstream moment. It happened through individual songs slowly finding an audience. Point Blank Range eventually became his biggest documented song on Spotify, followed by tracks including Breakdowns, Insane, What If I Stole Your Heart, and Care. Breakdowns were released January 3rd, 2025, and by this point, Lucille was building a recognizable identity, Scarlet. Then, all of a sudden, once again, Lucille entered another era. Scarlet dropped on June 27th, 2025. 9 songs, approximately 21 minutes. The tracklist is Motley, Backpedal, Kiss, Saluti, Whatever, Nautilus, Evil, and Amico, with ending off Myocardial. Scarlet feels different. The project is shorter, the title becomes more cryptic, and the sequencing feels more deliberate. The album starts with Motley. It immediately establishes the atmosphere of Scarlet. Rather than feeling like a continuation of Peace, You Idiot, it feels like Lucille is taking the idea from the album and pushing them somewhere stranger. Backpedal is only around a minute and a half long, and that's something that becomes increasingly interesting about Lucille's music. He doesn't seem particularly concerned with the traditional song structures or making every song fit a radio-friendly runtime. Some ideas only need 90 seconds, some need 3 minutes, some feel more like fragments. That gives the catalog a very internet native feeling. Whatever. Then there's Whatever, longest song on Scarlet at roughly 3.5 minutes, surrounded by much shorter tracks which make it stand out even more. The album almost feels like a collection of emotional snapshots rather than one conventional narrative. Shatter. Only a few months later, Lucille released Shatter, November 21st, 2025. 12 songs, around 30 minutes. Tracklist is Fallacy Motel, Catastrophe, Enough, Shred, Charades, Maggots, So Long, Asterisk, Blood, Dawn, Farewell, and Bittersweet. And the title Shatter almost perfectly describes the progression. If Peace You Idiot introduced the emotional chaos and Scarlet refined it, Shatter feels like everything breaking apart. Shred. Shred is one of the central tracks on the album, and sonically, the project leans further into Lucille's alternative identity. The music feels less like conventional underground rap and more like an artist creating his own hybrid between alternative rock, electronic music, and internet underground aesthetics. Then there's Asterisk. Released as a single on October 10th, 2025, it became part of the rollout leading into the full album. And this rollout shows another important part of Lucille's career. By this point, his releases weren't isolated songs anymore. There was an identifiable era, a visual language, a sound, and an audience waiting for whatever came next. Bittersweet. The album closes with Bittersweet, and that title is almost fitting for the entire Lucille catalog, because so much of his music exists between two emotions, love and hatred, attachment, isolation, confidence and insecurity, beauty and ugliness. That's the emotional contradiction that makes the music feel personal. Reprisal. And then came 2026. Lucille released Reprisal on July 17th, 2026. 12 songs, just under 25 minutes. Track list includes Kudos, Becky, Snake Eyes, Jesse and James, Simon Says, Cash Influx, Swing That Pull, Stain, See a Ho, Accent Fashion, Trust No Bit. And compared with the earlier albums, even the titles feel different. They're shorter, more aggressive, more confident, and less emotionally vulnerable on the surface. The progression is noticeable. Overkill. Overkill is especially important because it became one of the songs representing this new era. It was also released separately as a single on May 22nd, 2026, and that gives us a pretty clear timeline of the evolution. Phosphor Dreams, Experimental, I Wish I Was Pretty, Vulnerability, Peace You Idiot, His Identity, Scarlet, An Expansion, Shatter, The Collapse, and Reprisal as The Revenge. Or at least, that's how the progression feels when you look at the catalog as one story. What makes Lucille different? So what actually makes Lucille different? It's not simply the production. There are plenty of artists making distorted alternative music. It's not simply the lyrics. There are plenty of artists writing about depression, relationships, anger, and isolation. And it's not simply the underground aesthetic. That's everywhere now. The difference is the combination. Lucille has created a catalog where the music titles, artwork, emotion, and internet culture all feel connected. Even the way songs are structured feel different. A song can be barely over a minute. Another can be 3 minutes. A track can feel like an unfinished thought. Another can sound enormous, and somehow they still feel like they're coming from the same world. The numbers. And despite being an underground artist, the audience has clearly grown. At the time of researching this video, Spotify lists Point Blank Range at over 4 million plays, Breakdowns at over 3 million, and Insane at over 2 million. That matters because these numbers weren't built around one traditional pop hit. They came from the underground, from playlists, from internet communities, people discovering a song and passing it to somebody else. That's exactly how artists like Lucille can grow in the modern era.